Hi, good morning. I'm Janie Mitchell from the League-Kempner House in Galveston, and it's an incredibly exciting morning for us. We are down in the belly of the beast, as I call it, the basement. One more time, that's where we're going to spend a lot of this year, but today we have someone special. This is Santiago with Maximum Concrete, and he is here with his crew, and they are starting the work to pour the floor in the basement. And this is your company. You own this, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And I found Santiago on the Houston Contractor Network, I think, which is a Facebook group, because I don't actually have a concrete guy in this area. So I put a note up about the work I needed, and that I needed somebody insured, and a real company, not just fly by night. And Santiago responded very promptly, and I have to give you kudos. He's showed up on time. He's been incredibly responsive. I've had some scope changes, and so far so good. You've been great to work with. And like I said, they were here bright and early this morning, and we're getting started here in the basement. So we've already mapped out the scope changes that I'll go over with you guys in a minute. But I thought I'd get down here and film that before they got here, because usually if somebody says between 7 and 7:30, I get here at 6:30, and then they get here at 9. So I thought I'd have a lot of time. But like I said, he was very prompt, and just like Ricardo and his crew, they came in and just started working. So I'm going to turn the camera around and show you what his guys are already doing and talk a little bit about why. But thanks very much for being so professional, and it's going to be exciting. It's going to take, what, 2-3 days? Or
I'll say 3 days max.
3 days max. So that's going to be quite a transformation down here in the basement. It's going to be dramatically different. I'm crossing my fingers that we've got potentially bad weather coming, and water rushes in. That's one of the things we're trying to fix. So Santiago suggested maybe some sandbags, or like a little some stuff to build a little
trench,
dam or trench to stop that water from running in from the outside. We've stopped it from coming in under the walls, but we still have that problem where you're going to pour a higher step in that door to stop the water from coming in from the outside. So I'm going to let him get back to supervising and to work, and I'll, like I said, turn the camera around and show you what's going on. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
The very first thing they worked on was related to that scope change because of the problem with the floor joist that we talked about in the last video. Now we need to put that load-bearing beam back up on a permanent basis to support the floor, which means the post for that overhead beam need to rest on what's called a concrete beam. That term may be a bit confusing because we've been talking about wood beams that hold up the floor over our head. But basically, on a grade slab, when it's poured, deeper supports are put around the outer edges and across other key locations in the middle of the slab where you have heavy load. That concrete beam goes further into the ground than the rest of the slab. A beam depth could be anywhere from 2 to 4 feet, while the rest of the concrete surface is just about 3 or 4 inches thick. So a concrete beam is just a deeper, thicker section of concrete that can hold and support more weight where your home or building needs it. Our beam will be about 2 feet by 2 feet, so they're just really digging a trench, and it will have rebar in it to reinforce it. I worked with Santiago to determine exactly where the beam needed to be, and he marked it out with spray paint. The guys started digging that trench and immediately noticed the problems caused by, you guessed it, water. This was on a Monday morning, and on the Friday before, Galveston had torrential rains and high water and flooding everywhere. There were pictures all over the internet of the flooding down in Galveston. So the ground, of course, was very wet. I was actually surprised it wasn't wetter, because it's been like just sloshy wet in the past, and it was actually relatively firm on top. But they were digging down, and as I said, they were going about 2 feet to create that beam, and once they got about a foot down, water started seeping in and filling up the trench. As the guys were digging that first beam, we went over and marked out that second concrete footing that we need under the servant stairs to support the beam that holds up that stair area. And I'm going to get into the concept of these beams and what's going on with the joist in a later kind of nerdy scientific video for you guys. But for purposes of this video, just know that we're trying to make provisions in the floor to do additional work after the slab is poured. And in this case, X marks the spot where we need that additional support. Meanwhile, back at the trench, the guys were still struggling with the wet and soupy soil, but they were able to eventually kind of get the trench dug more or less. And now I mentioned this was a scope change, so this was not quoted in the bid that Santiago gave me. So that meant he needed to update his price that he quoted to account for this additional work. And I can't say enough about how happy I was to have chosen Maximum Concrete to do this work. They were so professional and so nice, and he ended up not charging me any additional labor, just the actual cost of the additional concrete needed for the beam, which was about, I think, 4 or 5 yards. I can't remember now. So anyway, these guys were just so great to work with. We were lucky because they didn't have to haul away and remove the dirt that they were digging out from this beam, because we still needed to bring in a lot of additional sand to raise this area up. It's much lower than it needs to be because, remember, we're trying to match an existing floor, so we have to get up to that level of floor, and we only want to have 4 inches of concrete because concrete is much more expensive than sand. So the goal for today is to get everything cleaned up, leveled, and then get good measurements on the height of the floor and calculate how much sand needs to be brought in to finish leveling these floors out to the right height to pour the concrete. These guys do big concrete jobs, so they have one of those fancy laser levels that you use when you're pouring a big foundation or a driveway. These are quite expensive, and it's probably a good thing that my mic was broken at this point because that it beeps just incessantly. One problem that needed solving was that the basement actually has 2 different levels of flooring. The level that we pulled up and that we're working on here in this area is one level, but towards the center of the house and on the west side, that floor is about 2 inches higher. These 2 floors were poured at different times, and they're actually constructed differently. The higher one is a concrete slab like we're pouring today. It's not just the brick on the ground with a little bit of concrete over it like the one that we broke up out of this section that we're working on. We put some thought into how to make the transition because it would be dangerous to have a 2-inch step up or down in areas with heavy foot traffic. And remember, this is going to be a gift shop area in addition to having the 2 apartments down here. I felt that this one area could handle the 2-inch step because we're going to have a wall to form part of the mechanical room, and that wall will be right where there's that change in elevation. So we can actually not have to worry about people walking through this area. The second area where we have a problem will have a lot of foot traffic. It will be right in the middle of where the gift shop is. So we made the decision to have a gentle slope to transition from the existing slab to the new slab in this area. We also need to form walls around the base of the elevator, what they call the pit of the elevator. This area was full of water, and they were worried about digging and having the ground collapse. So I went and got the sump pump and set it up and put the hose out to try to drain this area and see if we could dry it out some. Someone commented on my last video that I used a silly word when I said we were dewatering, but that actually is a technical engineering word for removing water from soil, usually ahead of mining or construction operations. But I'll concede it does sound like a silly made-up word. Once we got all the water we could out of the elevator pit, I turned my attention to that wishing well area. I'm using my brand new flashlight that my husband gave me for Christmas. He found it on the side of the road and he cleaned it up and he bought me a battery charger for it and gave it to me as a stocking gift. You cannot have too many flashlights in this house. The sump works great. I am so glad that one of the plumbers accidentally left it here, and I called several times and tried to return it, and they just didn't want to make the drive to pick it up, and we have been using it constantly. And yes, to answer a question I get often, we will install a permanent sump to try to keep this area dry. And getting someone to grade the yard and dig our retention pond has been one of the best investments made so far in this house in terms of keeping it dry and giving us a place to temporarily move water away from the house. It also helps us see at a glance exactly where the water table is so that we kind of know what's going on under the house. You can see here that the trench they're digging to be the beam is seeping water and starting to fill up. The guys abandoned work on the trench and moved on to demolishing about an 8-foot by 8-foot portion of the floor that we never removed. And again, we were lucky because this area is so low that instead of having to remove all this debris and haul it off to the dump, they could just throw it over into the low spots and use it as additional fill material. It didn't take much to break up this floor because, again, it's just brick laid on the dirt with a very thin layer of concrete poured over it. It's old and damaged and in bad shape, and the brick is brittle and has a lot of cracks to begin with, so this work went fairly quickly. But not this quick. It would be great if real work could be done in hyperlapse speed. It was amazing what just this little bit of demolition did, and putting that fill over in the really low spots and making everything smooth, how much better it looked down here. It really was awful looking before to come down here, and it didn't seem hopeless, but it was a little overwhelming at times, and it just really did my heart good to see things coming together and see this visible change in this area. There was one more area that needed to be demolished, and that was right at the base of the stairs. This area was very broken up and uneven, and the concrete would actually shift under your feet when you stepped on it. So it was pretty dangerous to walk on, and it needed to come out. And I was really happy to see them jackhammering this and getting it out of the way. But then, of course, we ran into something totally unexpected. It turns out what I thought was floor was really one of the big original support beams of the house that's made of brick and goes down several feet thick. Okay, it's solid under there. Is it solid under here too? Okay, this is a bit of a surprise. They were jackhammering this section out, and it was brick with the concrete over it, but then as it gets closer to the wall, it's actually solid concrete going back. So that's going to stay. That's not going to come out. So we'll just bring the floor up to this level and even it out. And digging, this is for the concrete around the well for the elevator, and you can see it's seeping full of water. And the pump has turned itself off. It has a float switch, but you can see down there water pouring in. That's the movement of water coming in a little hole down there. So this will fill back up and the pump will come on again and help pull that water from underneath the house. There's my pink pry bar. Oh, that's mine. put that with the other tools. They are digging a temporary trench to try to get the water to drain around this door and not come in, because that's what floods this basement now. So hopefully this will divert the water, get it over to our little holding area, and stop this from being a flooded out mess tomorrow. Violent storms are coming in. Gale force winds, lots of rain. Just what we need. A lot of this problem will be alleviated when we get our new roof and get our guttering back up in this area, so that all this water is collected in a downspout. It will run underground and feed over to our retention pond. But this is a stopgap measure. I think they're going to take it inside and use it as fill dirt. These guys had to improvise as they went, because we're pouring about a 7-inch higher threshold here to stop the water from flowing in. That means the door won't shut. So they marked 7 inches on the door and took their circular saw and cut the bottom off, so that when they do pour that curb, they can still close the door and get it screwed shut. And the next part I found just hysterically funny, because there's a 2x4 that's bolted onto the wall on either side of the door that forms the frame of the door, and that's what the plywood is hinged onto and what we screw the door shut into. And they marked it at 7 inches and used the circular saw again to cut off that piece of wood to get it out of the way so they could form up the curb. But when they tried using the circular saw, it couldn't quite go all the way through because of the angle of the door and the way things were situated. I was going to run up and get my sawzall to finish cutting through it, but they had a different idea. Before I knew it, one of the guys had grabbed their big concrete saw and was firing it up. It was a bit of overkill, but it did get the job done. That's one way to do it. The sun came out for a minute. It's kind of the calm before the storm, so they're going to go ahead and unload the rebar and get it in. Or get it unloaded, I should say. Looks like it's going to stay out here for a while. It had started raining earlier, but it stopped on and off, and it seemed to be holding off, so they continued working and started framing up that higher door threshold. Unfortunately, the break in the weather didn't last, so the decision was made to call it for the day. All the work that you just saw getting done took these guys about 5 hours. They were incredibly fast and efficient, and they did not mess around. Okay, they have done what they can do for today. They've got everything taped off. They must know me. And it looks as good as it can possibly look given the conditions we have. So the sand place opens at 7 tomorrow. They're going to be there at 7 to pick up, be here at 7:30. And we're just going to pray that we don't get flooding today. If you can hear it, but I did get the sump automatic switch to start working. So I'm going to leave it here overnight so that if it does rain, that hopefully this will keep up with the rain. I don't know. Fingers crossed. Alright, day 2 of trying to get the concrete in. I got here and the alarm is off. There was a power outage, so I'm not going in. Our break-ins have occurred during bad weather, people trying to find shelter. So I'm just going to wait on the concrete guys to show up, but you can see the evidence of the big windstorm that happened here. We got hail at my house in Houston. There's a lot of debris all over the yard. So I'll get that picked up today, but I think I'm going to just get back in my car and hang out and wait on these guys. I can never watch them back in through the gate. It makes me too nervous. But that's a lot of sand, and it's about to go inside, one wheelbarrow at a time. It is getting dumped. He thinks it's going to take 3 loads. When you put the laser level on, there's one area that's almost a foot below where it needs to be. And he was telling me that he had to go to 2 or 3 different places because of the rain. The sand was too wet. It was almost soupy, which makes it difficult to work with and very heavy. They needed something drier. This is still pretty damp. If you grab it, you can form it into a ball, like a snowball, but it's good enough. Long story short, the sand was so wet and so tightly packed in the trailer that it would not dump out. They tried and tried and tried to use the hydraulics to jolt the sand free and to get it to dump, but it just would not work. And then the trailer sunk in the dirt and made things even worse because the ground was so wet. So unfortunately, they're going to have to dig the sand out by hand from the trailer, which will just add a lot of work to the huge amount of work they already have to do today. It's not going to work. Get shovels and pull it out. Everything has to be more difficult than necessary with this house. I don't know why. It's just the way it works. So these poor guys, they'll get it. Okay, they are starting to bring in sand, and you can see this is about the level of the floor. See where the lines match up. I'm standing in the beam. See how the lines match up. So they want to be about 4 inches under that with the. They love the level because it gives such a visual representation of where you need to be. And they could see this line as they walked around on their pants leg. So instead of one person having to take the other part of their instrument and go place to place to place and constantly check depth, everybody could see exactly where they were at all times, and it really sped up the process. I think they'll be going and getting one of these soon, especially for indoor jobs like this. It wouldn't be great outdoors, like I said, on big slabs or driveways, but for this kind of work, it's perfect. Over here, how much further they have to go. So they're going to have to bring in quite a bit of sand in this area. That's a lot of wheelbarrows to come in. Okay, this could be like a sand avalanche. I went and opened that window to give these guys some more light back here. This is our kitchen area. I don't know about this window, if I can take the plywood off on the outside. What's going on here? Somebody's creatively latched it, but then that latch is broken. We're still struggling to get the sand to come out. It was hard to imagine that 3 full loads of sand would fit in that basement and not just make a giant mound. But as they brought it in and started spreading it out, it did not go as far as you thought. But with every wheelbarrow in, things just started looking better and better and better in this space. Okay, we just put the laser on. I have a problem. The stub out for the toilet is not tall enough. So I need to call David real quick and show him that. I got a hold of David, our plumber, right away, and he said that this really wasn't a problem. As long as that rounded part of the cap stuck out, it would be fine, because this will actually get sawed off flush with the floor, and a flange will fit down in the pipe. So it was not a problem. We just barely had enough room, but it will work. So with that problem out of the way, the guys finished spreading the sand. Everything had to be tamped down. They tamped it down by hand. This is the part of the process that Ricardo had been concerned about, because sometimes they'll bring in a big, heavy gas-powered machine to actually vibrate and pack the sand down, and he was worried that that intense vibration would be a problem for those that concrete that's left up between the floor joists. But they did everything by hand. It wasn't that much sand to tamp down, but I have done this before, and that tamper is heavy. It takes a lot of arm strength, and it's very fatiguing to do that repetitively over and over and over again. These guys work physically very hard. Everything about this process is heavy. The concrete's heavy, the rebar's heavy, the sand is heavy. It was a lot of work, and they worked hard all day long. If you blink, you'll miss it. I had to run about a 15-minute errand, and when I came back, all the plastic was already down, and the rebar was getting laid out, and they were already tying things together. I missed it. I missed it. Y'all were fast.
Oh.
It looks very different than the way it looked just 24 hours ago. And at this point, I'm starting to get pretty excited about the progress, because the weather is holding and things look good for getting this done this week. The heavy black plastic that you see all over the floor that I missed watching them lay down is a vapor barrier. We talked at length about water being a problem down here in that high water table, and concrete will deteriorate faster without a water vapor in place. And we've talked before, concrete is just like a hard sponge. It will absorb a lot of moisture. So This layer of plastic is one of the things that's going to keep that high water table from being a problem down here. Now, it will never be completely dry. This will help. It won't prevent all of our issues with water, but getting that brick off the bare soil and getting a vapor barrier down and a real foundation or a real slab floor down here will help tremendously with the amount of moisture in this basement. The rebar they're putting down comes in 20-foot lengths, and it will be cut to fit all the spaces and tied together, and that will add a lot of strength into that concrete slab to prevent cracking and heaving. The beam has to have rebar in it to give it additional strength, and to hold that rebar in place, they've bent pieces of rebar into what looks like rectangles that they call stirrups. And then they use wire to twist tie that long piece of rebar to each corner of those stirrups to basically make a rectangular cage that they set down in that trench. Everything's going really well, and if we hold to schedule, they will finish all this work today, and the next time they come, they'll be able to pour concrete. These guys could put that twist wire on so fast that I had to slow the video down even to see what he was doing. It looks very different than the way it looked just 24 hours ago, and at this point, I'm starting to get pretty excited about the progress because the weather is holding and things look good for getting this done this week. It reminds me of how my orthodontist used to put wires on my braces back in the olden days when they still did braces that way. Those of you in my age demographic will remember that well. Everything got wrapped up and they finished for the day, and it looks good for pouring later in the week. They did this work on a Tuesday, and we've scheduled the pour for Thursday morning because I need to get hold of the electrician and do a couple things down here before they can do the pour. And they actually need a day or two to get scheduled with the concrete company to get the truck ordered to get in here. It's going to take 2.5 truckloads of cement to do this job. It's actually quite a bit of flooring. So the next time we pick up, hopefully the concrete trucks will be here and we will get this floor finished and be able to move on. So thanks for watching. We're the League-Kempner House in Galveston, Texas. We're a nonprofit set up to restore this incredible house. Be sure and subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything. It's going to be a very busy year, and we are looking forward to a lot of changes in this house.